very clear that the whole idea here is to um, um, kill all the Palestinians in there, or those that aren't killed, shove out of the territory so they could take it over and annex it, which has been the goal of Israel for a very long time.
Welcome back. Today we dive deep into the murky waters of international espionage, government secrets, and the hidden realities of global politics with none other than James Bamford. James is the man whose name has become synonymous with unearthing the darkest secrets of intelligence operations, and not as a matter of speech, but in the most real sense. For those unfamiliar, Bamford is a real journalistic powerhouse. He is the man who dared to confront the National Security Agency, the NSA, long before it was cool or safe to do so. And as you will hear, he has done so with great personal risk. James has written a couple of really groundbreaking books like The Puzzle Palace and The Shadow Factory. They have been New York Times bestsellers, and he even snagged a National Magazine Award for his fearless reporting on the war in Iraq. Now, this isn't my first conversation with James. We have already ruffled some feathers with our discussion on the Israeli super spy turned Hollywood billionaire Arnon Milchan and James' really explosive allegations on Israel's interference in the 2016 US elections, not the Russian. And in today's interview, we are going even further down this rabbit hole. We are talking about things that certain powers that be would rather keep buried as deep as possible. We are digging into the USS Liberty Incident, a tragedy that has been swept under the rug for really far too long. If you haven't heard about it yet, this will be a real eye-opener. Then we are exposing US complicity in Israeli assassinations. Yes, you've heard that right. And here it comes, we are shining a light on the truly heartbreaking fate of a 6-year-old Hind Rajab whose desperate phone calls for help went unanswered as she and her family were first shot and then squashed by an Israeli tank in Gaza. So this interview isn't just another chat. It's a call to action. It's a plea for awareness. We are here to ask tough questions because someone has to. The information we're discussing today isn't just for the history books. It's for understanding the present, for demanding accountability, for ensuring that tragedies like Hind's don't just become footnotes in our collective amnesia. This interview isn't just about dissecting the problems. It's about understanding what's at stake and imagining what could be different. And as always, don't take our word for it, question everything, especially your own assumptions. One last thing. Critical voices like the ones you hear on this channel are being actively silenced and suppressed. You will hear Biljana mention this herself in the interview. You may not notice it. You may not know it. You may not even believe it, but it does happen. And I have the statistics to prove it. So if you do value sharp, unfiltered analysis that doesn't follow the mainstream narrative, hit the subscribe button, like and share. It really makes a difference. And for those who really want to keep up with my work, make sure you join me on Substack. No restricting algorithmic filters there. Or you can listen on my podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Amazon. The links are in the description below. Thank you. James Bamford, thank you again for your time. How are you?
Great to be here, Thomas. Thanks for having me on again.
We already spoke twice. Most recently you did the introduction for the interview with Maria Butina, who you knew and followed for multiple years. And before that, we had an interview which basically was split in two main topics. One was the election interference in 2016, but not from Russia, but from Israel. And the second one was the super spy in Hollywood, Arnon Milchan. Today, we have a slightly, we also will discuss Israel, but I mean, the events happen so fast, it's hard to keep up. Now, the Syrian regime in Damascus has fallen. Israel has added another buffer zone in front of the already existing buffer zone in Israel on the Golan Heights. Turkey is involved. America is involved. It's really hard to keep up with all those developments.
Well, it certainly is. Yeah. I mean, you got everybody has their finger in the pot, as they say, basically. And it changes day by day. One key question is how did the U.S. intelligence and Russian intelligence and everybody else miss this? It sprang up apparently by surprise to virtually every country I don't know about Turkey, but certainly the United States didn't seem to have any pre-knowledge of this.
I'm a bit surprised that you said it. I mean, I know for Iran and eh, for Iran and Hezbollah, of course, that was a surprise, right? But what I'm hearing, America was not only informed; they were actively involved. So Jeffrey Sachs said it's America, it's Turkey, and it's Israel. Those three countries orchestrated this.
Well, I don't know about orchestrating it. We had, I don't, 900 troops up in I think the northwest corner, aided by the Kurds. So, I mean, we have some people in there, but I think the U.S. was focused mostly on Israel and on Gaza and on Ukraine, and there really hadn't been much activity here. Again, other people may know more than I do, but that's since my attention has always been on Ukraine and also on Gaza and Israel and so forth. So I hadn't paid any attention to Syria for years.
Yeah, so did apparently the Syrian government under Assad, right? But
So it
again,
was a
that's not
perfect
the topic.
opportunity for them because they could see that the U.S. was distracted, Russia was distracted, Israel was distracted,
And
and
Iran was distracted. Yeah.
and yeah, their Lebanon and so forth, all their allies were all of Syria's allies were distracted. So it gave a perfect time for the rebels to gather their strength and make their move, which obviously they did.
To give viewers who do not know you a little bit of context, so I fished out five publications, or let's say five topics that you wrote about. The first two you and me already discussed. Number one is the USS. Oh, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I have 5 points, and I briefly would like you to comment on, not extensively, just briefly as an introduction to this interview. Yeah? Now the first one is the USS Liberty incident, and Phil Turney, which we both know because you know him personally. I interviewed him. Is one of the survivors. So very briefly, USS Liberty for people who do not know.
Well, the USS Liberty was a spy ship, electronic surveillance ship, and I wrote an entire book on. Actually, I've written three books on the NSA, the National Security Agency, and I wrote a chapter on the USS Liberty. I had a somewhat personal connection because the USS Liberty was part of the U.S. Navy, especially part of a fairly secret little part of the U.S. Navy called the Naval Security Group. And I also worked in the Naval Security Group at that very same time on the other side of the world in Hawaii. And we had our own ship, the USS Pueblo, for example, which was a electronic spy ship. So I was familiar with the Liberty at the time. And so I wrote an entire chapter on the attack on the Liberty by Israel and did a great deal of research, interviewed lots and lots of people involved, both in the intelligence community and on the ship. And there was unanimity in the fact that Israel did it deliberately because it was broad daylight. The ship had its name in very large letters on the back. It was flying an American flag. The Israelis did numerous reconnaissance flights over the ship during the morning. Again, it was a very clear day. And then they didn't just attack it briefly. They attacked it for hours and hours, and not just with a plane, but multiple fighters, that took out the communications facility first, so that the ship could not call for help, and then attacked it mercilessly with napalm and everything else. And finally, after they did as much damage as they could to the surface of the ship and to the personnel, they had, I think it was five, or they had three torpedo boats that fired uh, five torpedoes at the ship. One of them hit the ship um, in the middle of the ship, right on the water line, and killed, I think it was around 30 people in that one instance. And those are the people that were working on the intercept, the eavesdropping, and so forth. So it was an enormously horrendous activity. It was the worst attack on a U.S. Navy ship in peacetime in U.S. history. So yeah, it was extremely tragic, and I've spoken last year and the year before at their annual reunion.
I think there were 300 people on the boat. 182 or 183 were either killed or wounded. So it was quite an impact. You wrote about it. I interviewed Phil Turney, one of the survivors. So if people are interested, that's the way to go. Number two, Israeli involvement in the 2016 election. Again, encapsulate what you discovered.
Well, it wasn't until several years after all the Russiagate um, attention was on the election, and I was working on a new book called Spy Fail, about the failure of U.S. counterintelligence. And I obtained documents, and these documents were released under the Freedom of Information Act. Anybody could get them, and they were from the FBI. And there was a fairly good stack of these documents. And what they were basically was a search warrant uh, issued by the court, asked for by the FBI and issued by the court, for the telephone records of a particular individual, an Israeli individual. They blanked out the individual's name, but they left in all the transcripts of these conversations, and they were conversations between an Israeli agent working directly for Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Trump campaign. They indicated that the agent was in touch with members of the Trump campaign, and trying as hard as he could to get access to Trump himself, very secretly. These were for very secret meetings. And the bottom line was there was a quid pro quo. We would help you, the Trump campaign, in terms of supplying information that might be useful to you, if you help us. And what they wanted was, if he became president, a promise that if he became president, that he would, um, that the U.S. government would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel as opposed to Tel Aviv. So you read through those documents, and it's rather amazing that nobody was arrested. Oliver Stone was the, I'm sorry, um,
Not Oliver Stone, the other Stone.
Roger Stone, rather. Sorry,
Roger Stone, yeah.
get my stones mixed up here. Um, Roger Stone was the key contact by the Israeli agent. The Israeli agent went through Roger Stone to get to Trump, sort of by trying to avoid going through the front door. They basically went through the back door by going through Roger Stone. And so the entire summer, there are these emails back and forth um, about getting access to Trump, about helping Trump, about doing whatever they could to get what they wanted. And in the end, they succeeded, because in September, Netanyahu flew to the United States, met with Trump up in his penthouse in New York, Trump Tower, and they held a joint news conference. And in that news conference, Trump publicly stated that if he was elected, he would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So all that happened. Roger Stone wasn't, he was arrested for other things, but he wasn't charged with this. Other people involved, nothing ever happened to them. There was no outcry over Israel because it was kept as quiet as possible, as opposed to Russia, where there were no indications of Russiagate. Russia didn't interfere in the election with Trump, or Trump never interfered with Israel. I mean, that's separate from Israel going after the documents, the emails from Hillary Clinton. That really wasn't part of Russiagate. Russiagate was whether Trump was in a conspiracy with Russia, and it turned out he wasn't. However, the um, um, Israeli government was engaged in a conspiracy with the Trump campaign.
Yeah. So again, this I believe this is also in your book Spyfail. You and me have talked about that specific topic, Israeli election interference, in a separate interview. I will put the link in the description. And there is a link to Maria Butina, right?
Yeah,
So in my vision, they tried to cover one scandal with another. They put all the focus. I mean, at that time it was really big news. Maria Butina, she was compared to the Red Sparrow,
right.
yeah, the
Seductive. Yeah.
seductive spy, right? It was blown out of all proportions. And the interesting thing is, you knew her already before that all happened.
Right. I knew her when she first got here, basically, when she first came to Washington and registered as a grad student at American University because I was a columnist for Foreign Policy magazine. And so I wrote a lot about foreign policy, obviously, and in order to do that, I had to attend a lot of lectures and so forth in Washington. And at one of those lectures, I think it was dealing with peace in the Middle East or something, uh, I told somebody standing near me that I was going to take the Trans-Siberian Railway because I was fascinated by Russia. I'd been there a number of times, but never taken the railroad. And he said, "Oh, you should talk to this woman over there. She was actually born in Siberia." So I had never talked to anybody from Siberia. So I started a conversation with Maria, and that was long before any attention was paid to her on the Russiagate scandal. So for a year, I knew her before any of this stuff happened, and we would see each other, get together every now and then at these lectures and different events in Washington. So obviously I knew her. I've been writing about intelligence all my life, especially U.S. and Russian intelligence, and in that entire year, uh, and obviously she knew who I was and what I wrote. She never once asked me any questions whatsoever about intelligence, or can introduce her to a source or somebody that or whatever. I mean, so there was no indication whatsoever that she was anything but what she appeared to be, a grad student at American University. But Russiagate came along, and the FBI counterintelligence, which, as I write in my book, is rather incompetent, were looking for somebody to arrest. Well, the Russians didn't have any unofficial spies in Washington. All their spies have diplomatic immunity at the embassy. So she was the low-hanging fruit, as they say, and they uh, went after Maria, and it was a horrible experience. They put her in solitary confinement. This is a 20-something grad student visiting the United States, never been in trouble before, and they put her in solitary confinement for months and months until and then said, if she didn't agree to a guilty plea, that she may face 25 years in prison. She's at 6,000 miles from home and her parents and so forth. So obviously, she did that, and in order to get out within a year and a half. And so, yeah, that's the Maria Butina story in a nutshell, except for the fact that they took an innocent person and turned them completely against the United States for horrible reasons.
I will put the link for my interview with Maria, to which you kindly did the introduction, in the description below. Now we have a third one that was a new one for me. US intelligence support to Israel. And I believe the article was called How US Intelligence and an American Company Feed Israel's Killing Machine in Gaza.
Yeah, the U.S. for decades, ever since the relationship started decades and decades ago, the U.S. and Israel have been the closest allies in terms of intelligence, especially signals intelligence. So the NSA and the Israeli equivalent, Unit 8200, are extremely close allies and friends. And the U.S. exchanges a great deal of intelligence back and forth, more so than almost any other country in terms of raw data. It came out during the Intelligence Committee hearings years ago when the investigation into the intelligence agencies that Israel was giving that the U.S. was giving unredacted um, intercepts to Israelis. In other words, the U.S. was conducting warrantless eavesdropping on Americans, particularly Palestinians in the United States, and turning over the raw data without any kind of court authorization to Israel. And then they could use that to go after relatives of the Palestinians. So that relationship had been going on a long time. And in order to foster that relationship, the U.S. sends uh, personnel over to Unit 8200 to work with the people there, and Unit 8200 sends people to NSA headquarters at Fort Meade to work closely with NSA there. So, as this war in Gaza, war against Gaza, has been going on, the U.S. has had allies, or rather, has had personnel working with the Israelis at the very same time they're committing a genocide in Gaza. So the U.S. knows a great deal about what the Israelis are doing. The U.S. helps a great deal with what the Israelis are doing. And I, in the article I wrote for The Nation magazine, I cited documents that have been released by Edward Snowden, and I was the first person to interview Snowden in Moscow after he fled the U.S. So I got a hold of those documents, and they showed that there was communications back and forth between the United States representative, NSA's representative at Unit 8200 and the headquarters. One of the things the person said was this was during an earlier conflict a few years earlier, but what the person, the U.S. NSA representative in Israel said was that the Israelis wanted access to certain information that would be able to target people for assassination. And the person, the NSA person said, well, by law, we're not allowed to give that to you. So the official at 8200 went over that person's head directly to NSA headquarters, and the response that came back was it's been all worked out. Worked out meaning apparently the U.S. caved in and gave the information. So again, the U.S. has people over there right now. They know what's going on. They're helping them, and as I wrote in several articles actually for the Nation, the U.S. is a co-belligerent in the war because we're not only supplying intelligence, we're actually supplying the bombs that are being dropped. I mean, the United States builds the bombs, we pay for the bombs, we ship the bombs to Israel. The bombs are carried over Gaza in U.S. aircraft. All the Israelis do is push a button and drop them on the civilians, killing uh, probably well over 50, 60, who knows how many thousands now, because so many are buried under the rubble.
You made reference to one specific company, if I'm not mistaken,
Well,
in the article.
Palantir is one of the companies. Palantir's, excuse me. Palantir is a very wealthy, high-tech company in the United States. It specializes in developing software for warfighters, for people, governments, particularly the United States government, that are involved in military conflicts and in intelligence activities. So, among the things that they do is create targeting software. And it's been very controversial in terms of Israel because a lot of the targeting information that Israel uses is automated using AI.
Artificial intelligence, yeah.
And so what you have is basically automated killing. In other words, they'll submit a details about the general status of what people are like, a certain age, a certain movement types, a certain categories, an algorithm basically outlining what they're looking for. And then the machine goes out there and finds these people that fit that algorithm, and then they're automatically killed, basically. I mean, you've got an automatic killing machine that's based on robotics in essence. So yeah, that's a very dangerous thing. And again, there's very little information that's released by either the United States or by the company or by Israel.
And that ties in with the information that America gave to Israel, because in uh, in Gaza you could be killed based on a phone call that a relative did in America, right? And AI then creates this data points, and you end up on the list, and you and your family, yeah, more and more it's our families, are being incinerated. So there is a direct, it's not something abstract. So America gave some data to Israel. Who cares? No, people are directly affected.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, the intelligence activities are extremely interlinked. I mean, they've been interlinked for years. It's basically the same intelligence agency. The Israeli Unit 8200 and NSA. So because they cooperate so closely. And it's a U.S. company, Palantir, that supplies software, and they also supply the same targeting and other kinds of software uh, to the U.S. government. I mean, the U.S. government uses the same targeting uh, uh, information itself. It uses with the Ukraine, for example. Palantir is one of the biggest customers for, or rather, Ukraine's one of the biggest customers for Palantir. So, um, yeah, so all this is going on, sight unseen by the American public, but it's very dangerous when you're allowing U.S. money to be spent on aiding countries and using U.S. companies to conduct robotic killings.
I have two more articles before we come to the main topic of our interview today. Yeah? There's an article called Israel's War on Student Activists.
Yeah, the Israelis have been very heavily involved in the student movement because they're very angry at the fact that the U.S. is allowing a lot of students to conduct very vocal, active protests against the Gaza war. And one of the groups that's very heavily involved in trying to tamp down the protests is the Israeli or the American Israeli Council. It's a group that's made up of largely Israelis who are living in the United States who are dual citizens. Uh, and it's a very active group in terms of trying to involve themselves in the protest movement. They got very heavily involved in the movement at UCLA, where which is what I wrote about, and they had a lot of people that were very heavily involved in the fighting that took place at the school. So. In an earlier article, I wrote how that same group, was very closely linked to Israel, both financially and through uh, uh, personal relationships in Israel. So you have that council, um, both getting very great deal of support from Israel and also acting very aggressively in trying to put down the student movement. So you see a direct link between Israel and putting down the student movement, which the U.S. really should not allow. I mean, they shouldn't allow interference by a foreign country to uh, get involved in U.S. student protest movements.
It reminded me, I mean, from looking from the outside, from Europe, yeah, the images that I saw from those student protests, they were brutally cut down. It really reminded me on the protests from Vietnam.
Well, it was, yeah. And I was a student activist during Vietnam. I actually served in the Navy during Vietnam, and when I got out of the Navy, I was in law school and I took part in some of those protests. So, yeah, it they were very similar. A lot of those were very similar. Some of them were far more aggressive and violent and in the way that the U.S. government put it down than even during Vietnam. And they uh, succeeded largely because the protest movement has been fairly quiet this last semester. So there's been a lot of threats and a lot of hostility by the universities against these protesters, and as a result, things like we'll throw you out of school, we'll take your tuition away, or whatever, these kind of things, these threats. So as a result of that, the protest movement has been quiet, at least on the surface, this semester.
Hmm. Now, I kept the best for last. October the 7th, why Israel slept.
Yeah, well, Israel was extremely overconfident. They had so many electronic surveillance systems in place around uh, the occupied Gaza area, and they felt extremely confident that nothing that they would ever do would be able to succeed. In addition, they had people planted in there that were eavesdropping on conversations and so forth. They had all the communications were being intercepted, so they could tell if what was being said among themselves and to people outside. They had planes that would constantly, or rather drones that would constantly fly over to see what was going on. What they didn't understand was that all the planning was being done underneath in the tunnels, and that they weren't using cell phones. They were actually using wired landlines in order to communicate, which would have been impossible for the Israelis to intercept, since they were, first of all, they were underground mostly, and second of all, they were attached by wires that the Israelis had no knowledge about. In addition, they actually had a plan that somehow got out. It was either leaked out or somehow the Israelis got a hold of it, that largely outlined what was being planned, and the Israelis paid very little attention to it because they just thought, well, they could try what they want, they'll never succeed. And lo and behold, on October 7th, they were proven wrong.
There would be a lot to be said about October the 7th. I think we don't do it now because we could fill the whole interview with that topic. What puzzled me, one last thing, what puzzled me is simply the time it took for Israel to react. Yeah, Israel is not a massive country like the US. Israel is a tiny country. Any Apache helicopter, not to mention F-16, is in like minutes on everywhere, and it took up to 48 hours to some of those places where the Israeli military arrived. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
There were huge holes in the fence at that by that time. There were trucks or vehicles being driven through the fence. There were the Hamas had drones. It was incredible how organized and how planned and how much was carried out before there was any reaction.
yeah. Now, coming to the actual topic of our conversation today, And I stumbled across this in our last conversation that we had regarding Maria Butina. Then you told me that you actually wrote about personal stories within Gaza, so civilian stories in Gaza. Maybe you can give us a little bit of context first before we dive into this topic?
Um, well, I haven't interviewed anybody over there. I'm not sure what conversations you're talking about.
You and me, we discussed last time that you investigated the actual events on the ground, and I have here some documentation. Bamford has documented the experience of Palestinian civilians during military operations in Gaza. He
Well,
highlights the human. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I did that for the article which we just talked about, but um, that was for research. I wasn't in Gaza or in Israel or Gaza at that time. I've been to Israel. I've been shot at by the settlers over there, but that was
when was that? When was that?
uh, that was back in the 90s. I was with ABC News, and I uh, did a story on a murder that took place in the United States. The murderer and his wife, who was also a co-conspirator, fled to Israel. The U.S. never went after him for 10 years. I found out about it, um, and I went over there and found him, and he's in. It's a long story, but he because
Maybe
people are
start from the
afraid, went to
beginning.
prison.
Maybe start from the beginning. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, okay. Um, yeah, let me get a drink of water first.
Sure, take your time.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I was with ABC News. I was the investigative producer for World News Tonight by Peter Jennings. And one of the stories that I came up with was I was in California, and I happened to meet a young woman there. I think she was in her early 20s, and she told me about how her mother um, had been blown up by a bomb, a mail bomb, and the destroyed her entire family. Her father sort of freaked out after that, or uh, just couldn't handle it and disappeared. And so the two kids were put in foster homes in two different states. It's a really tragic story. And I asked, well, whatever happened to the person who sent the bomb, the mail bomb? And she said they never arrested him. Apparently, he escaped, and they never went after him. So I had sources in the uh, Postal Inspection Service, which was the group that was actually doing the investigation, and they uh, gave me a good deal of help in terms of what happened. And what happened was that the person that was involved, or the people that were involved, were a husband and wife, Robert Manning and his wife, Rochelle Manning. And they lived in California. That's where this took place, in Los Angeles area. And they were members of the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, which was officially designated a terrorist organization, um, because it was a very violent organization, going after people that they thought were against Israel. Um, so the person in the Postal Inspection Service told me that the Mannings had fled to Israel, and they're hiding out in Israel. And all this took place 10 years before. And then he said that the U.S. government never bothered to send in an extradition request for him. So I decided to look into it myself, and I got uh, Peter Jennings was interested in the story too, so they sent me to Israel to look into it, and it took some time, but I was able to locate where Robert Manning and his wife were living, and I found them in Kiryat Arba, one of the right-wing settlements in the occupied territory. So we staked out their house with a hidden camera and a car, trying to get a shot. I mean, the whole idea is that you have to get a shot of these people before they know you're looking for them. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to find them. So it took quite a while, several days, and we were able to get a shot of him. He came out of his house and went to his car, and he had an army uniform on. He was carrying an Uzi submachine gun. And he got into his car and he drove it. Um, we were following him. I was hoping he wasn't going to turn left outside of Kiryat Arba because that would have taken him into Hebron. And this was during the Intifada, and we were driving in a car that had Israeli plates. So we were getting stoned as we are driving around, and his car had all kinds of protections on it, screens on the front and everything. So it would have been very dangerous to take a left for us to go into Hebron, but luckily he took a right, so we continued to follow him, and then he turned off onto a side road. And so, we decided to keep following him, even though it was a dirt road and we looked somewhat obvious following him. And then he went into an army base. And at that point, we were at the end of the road. We couldn't do anything. If we turned around, we would have looked really suspicious. So I was driving. I just drove up and I waved at the guard. He waved us in, and we went into the army base. But we already had these shots of Manning. I didn't want to lose those by having the car searched and all that. So we got off the base as soon as possible. Went back to his house, took out. Now I knew he was gone, so we took out the tripod and the camera and all that, set it up, and we're shooting at his house when a guard came out with an Uzi machine gun and started firing at us. He was shooting over our head, like that. And then he yelled, "The next one's going in your belly." And so I went up and talked to him, and the crew put the camera away at that point. And Yeah, said he was protecting the Manning house and the other house in that little compound there. Um, so then I interviewed the Attorney General of Israel and a number of other people, and said, well, he's here because the U.S. never sent an extradition request. Um, so then we did our story, and all of a sudden it attracted a great deal of attention because, well, first of all, we had the film of us being shot at by the settlers there. And It was a very, tragic story. Here's an American woman killed in a mail bomb, and the U.S. never bothered to go after him. So after that, the U.S. did send an extradition request to Israel, and the Israelis at that point arrested Manning and his wife and put them in jail. And then they fought extradition for years. I think it was like 3 years or something. And they, or at least a few years, and then because the crime was committed before they went to Israel in the United States, before they went to Israel, the Supreme Court in Israel sent them back to the United States, or at least sent Robert Manning back to the United States for trial. And So he was tried. He was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison with possibility of parole after 30 years. And Lo and behold, 30 years expired last month or a couple months ago, and he's out now. So whatever he's doing, I have no idea. But that was the story. And again, the bottom line was that here's Israel. They're holding somebody that they know, even putting him in their army, that they know is a wanted murderer in the United States. He was also a suspect in several other murders, and never bothered to return him. Uh, and like I said, even put him in there in his army in the U.S. because he was in Israel as opposed to some other country. Um, Never bothered to go after him. So it's just really a tragic story about how that relationship between the U.S. and Israel is very corrupt a lot of times, and this is one of the worst examples of it, where they harbor a wanted murderer, and the U.S. never bothers to even try to get him back.
Fascinating story, and I briefly remember we discussed this after our interview last time. Was it ever clear why a letter bomb was sent in the first place?
Yeah, when the trial was held, they also one of the co-conspirators was the person who hired Manning or the Mannings to do this. It was they did it jointly because they got fingerprints off the packing by Robert Manning, and they got fingerprints off the letter. There was a letter that was attached to it from Manning's wife. Um, so what had happened was there was a very wealthy member of the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, that lived in the area, a real estate developer. He had a real estate um, uh, uh, issue, a argument, a fight, a real estate fight, basically over money with the president of this small computer company. Um, so the this real estate developer, I can't remember what his name is, but he hired Manning because he knew Manning was very good on explosives. I think he worked in explosives in the U.S. Army at one point or something like that. So he knew a lot about explosives, and he had a reputation of building bombs. Um, so he built this bomb at the request of this real estate developer to be sent to the president of this small computer company in Los Angeles. It's a woman. It was a woman. So it gets mailed. It arrives around noontime. The woman is out to lunch. Went out to lunch. So her secretary, Patricia Wilkerson, opened the package, and what it was a tape recorder. And there was a note in there and said, "Look, I'm not very articulate. I like your company. I have a great idea for a new product for your company. Um, but because I'm not very articulate, um, I I describe it on a tape. So the tape and the tape recorder here, all you have to do is listen to the tape, and it'll tell you this marvelous way of this new system that I've come up with, or whatever." So anyway, so the secretary takes the tape recorder out and plugs it in. As soon as she plugs it in, that completes the circuit that blew the bomb up. What and it was an extremely powerful bomb. I mean, it blew a hole through the wall. She was Parts of her were blown to the other side of the street. It was a horrible, horrible explosion. But when she had opened the package, she left the package, the wrapping on the other side of the room. So that wasn't injured. So they were able to get the fingerprints off the packing and also off the letter. And there was other evidence also. So they knew it was Manning, and they so that's why it was done. And both Manning and the real estate co-conspirator were sentenced to life in prison. And the real estate person died a number of years ago, but Manning was just released.
How old is Manning? Do you know?
I think
Now,
probably
today.
he must be in his early 70s, I guess, or late 60s,
Hmm.
or must be. Well, he was in prison for 30 years, and he was probably maybe mid 30s or whatever
Yeah,
when it took place. So you know, late 60s, maybe something like that.
yeah. Now that was a case where he was not even a fugitive, right? Because he wasn't wanted, but someone with escaped from America to Israel. Now I'm wondering, whilst you talk, I'm wondering. I mean, we have this flood of images that IDF members post from themselves while they commit what can be described as war crimes. Many of those have dual citizenship, either American or otherwise. Now, do you think? I mean, sooner or later, this debacle hopefully will be over. Yeah, but these people, they will go back to their normal lives. They will travel. They maybe go back into back to America or to Europe, right? What's the chances here for someone like you to follow up on some of the more gruesome crimes that have been committed in Gaza or the West Bank?
It's extremely difficult. The Israelis are not allowing any journalists into Gaza or any Western journalists into Gaza, for one thing. So I recently did a story based on some pictures that were taken in Gaza, um, and they were pictures of weapons, the remnants of exploded bombs. And in the pictures, you could see the serial numbers on those, the remnants of the bombs. So I looked into where those serial numbers originated, and I was able to find bombs that were being made in the United States. For example, the Iowa ammunition, uh, a huge company or a huge facility in Iowa, which makes a lot of the munitions that go to Israel. And then another one in another huge facility down in Oklahoma that makes the 2,000-pound bombs that go to Israel. So in the article, I was able to show that here we are, we're the ones who are actually making these bombs. They're made by people out in the Midwest who, they go out and make their bombs and they go home and have dinner and take care of their family and so forth. And it's like they have no idea the end result of what those bombs are going to be doing. And the Israelis use them to destroy enormous numbers of civilians. In that article that I wrote for The Nation magazine, um, what I did was I showed one instance of that, one particular instance, and what that was um, there was this family that had already been bombed out of their house at one point, and so they had to move to another part of Gaza, and then uh, there was a warning that the Israelis were going to bomb that part of Gaza. So part of the family, the husband and the wife and a couple kids and a cousin got into the car and they began driving through um, part of the city there. They didn't get very far, but they were driving through part of the city to try to escape before the bombs came. And uh, actually, his wife stayed back um, while. Let me back up. There were members of the family that stayed back who were going to go later, and the father took his wife, children, and one uh, niece to another part of town. Before they could get there, they were stopped by a tank, an Israeli tank. And again, these are just civilians in a car. Um, and so the tank started opening fire with a machine gun, one of these machine guns on the tank, firing at this civilian car with civilians in it. And the little girl in the back, she was only 6 years old. She was the niece, called her mother, who was back at the house, and told her, that she was in the car. People have been shot. They're shooting at them, and thinks some of them are injured, some are dead, or whatever. So the mother then calls the ambulance to go, try to save them. But the Israelis have this rule where the ambulance can't go anywhere without getting permission from the Israelis. The Israelis took 3 hours before they gave them permission to go to that car, even though it was just on the other side of town. As the ambulance is getting to the car, the woman is still in touch with her daughter, the girl in the car, 6-year-old girl in the car. And the girl in the car says, the tank is coming closer. It's in front of us now. And she's screaming. And and then there's this huge explosion. And the girl hears the explosion. The girl on the phone hears the explosion. And what the explosion was the tank firing an anti-tank round into the ambulance, killing the driver and the other medic uh, in the ambulance that were on their way almost to the car. And then and then afterwards, everybody was dead in the car, and it indicated that the tank, or at least a tank, had actually driven over the car with the people in it. Um, you can't get a more horrible story than that. And then I was able to trace the weapons that were used, like the shell that was fired at the ambulance, through the serial number to the actual plant in Iowa that built the bomb, or built the anti-tank round, and to show how there's a direct connection between the American public who are paying for this, the actual people who are working day to day in these plants, and the deaths of innocent civilians who are children and never harmed anybody, and what appears to be the pleasure taken in it. Uh, I mean, if you fired a car, go see who's in it, or whatever, and they don't. They just kill everybody in it, and then they apparently, just for laughs, they drive a tank over it. And then they shoot the ambulance coming to their rescue, blow everybody up with a shell designed to pierce a tank. Um, so it's horrible, and you only find that out by almost by accident, because I happened to see a picture there with the uh, serial number on it. Again, that's why one of the reasons why they don't allow Westerners, or Western journalists, Western media, to come into to Gaza, because then you actually witness what's actually going on. You witness tanks shooting at civilian cars and ambulances and all these things. So anyway, so that might have been what you were talking about originally, but again, that was done through. I didn't go there. I actually saw the videos of the destruction and the serial numbers.
But how did you get the story from the little girl calling her mother and so? How?
Well, that was a big story in Israel, because I mean in Gaza. The story was all over Gaza because of it was absolute proof of what was going on. Most times you don't have that kind of proof, but here the little girl was in direct communications over the phone. And a lot of these phone conversations were being recorded. For example, when they were calling the ambulance service recorded those calls. And so the calls between the girl and the parents and the girl and the ambulance and all that, a lot of those were recorded. And so, there was absolute proof. And that's something you almost never get, because like I said, it's Israel's word against the world, because there's nobody there to um, observe what's going on, or collect interviews with these people, or whatever. They just are killed, and the only people that are alive to tell the story afterwards are the Israelis. The people in Gaza are dead. And it's very clear that the whole idea here is to um, um, kill all the Palestinians in there, or those that aren't killed, shove out of the territory so they could take it over and annex it, which has been the goal of Israel for a very long time. That they consider it their property, or their land, and so um, that's one of the reasons this is going on. It's why they've been accused of genocide, why they're in front of the International Court of Justice on charges of genocide. The prime minister is a war criminal, wanted for murder, war by starvation. I mean, you don't get any worse than that.
For someone who would like to read the actual article, how is it called and where was it published?
Well, it was published in the Nation magazine. It was just published last month. Well, actually, it wasn't in the magazine. I don't write. It's online. The What I write is sort of immediate. It takes 6 weeks in advance to actually get it in the magazine. But so it's online. All anybody has to do is go to the Nation website, the Nation magazine website, and just put my name in there, James Bamford, and you'll get every article I ever wrote.
Okay.
Or
Now
just
we
Google
discussed.
me, and it'll be there. So it'll be easy to find.
Okay, if I find it, I put a link in the description of this interview. We're coming to the top of the hour, Jim. But out of interest, I mean, you are a really established investigative journalist. You're an author. You have an amazing career. Why the interest in Israel? Was it always, or gradually, or was there a specific moment that somehow changed your vision, or how did this develop?
I've always been interested in the world, what's going on in the world. I've majored in international um, relations in college. I studied international law in law school. And I've always written about different parts of the world. So Israel is just one part. I've written a lot about Russia. I wrote a book on the war in Iraq. Um, so, and I've been to all these places. I've been to Iraq. I covered well, I was in Kuwait during the Gulf War for ABC News, covering a lot of the aftermath of the war there, um, the horrible story that went on after the war and partly during the war. So I've been to a lot of these places, covered a lot of these things for ABC or for PBS. I was in Russia for PBS, interviewing Snowden, and so I've done a lot of international reporting. And Israel was always interesting because of our extremely close relationship and the fact that Israel gets away with so much. Um, from the time of the USS Liberty till present. So that's one of the reasons I focused on Israel, is because that, and because a lot of other people don't focus on it. I mean, it's a topic that a lot of publications for political reasons want to stay away from.
You must have experienced some type of backlash
It's
for
kind
your
of funny.
reporting on Israel.
I never have. I've never had any backlash or anything. I mean, I write what I write, and that's it. People just accept it. I just don't. So I'm sorry for people that it happens to, and I know it happens to a lot of people, but I just can't think of anything that I get for a backlash. So
Knock on wood. I hope for you it stays like that.
yeah, yeah. Just I write about a lot of countries. I don't write just about Israel. I write about a lot of countries, and Israel is one of them. And I don't. The only backlash I've ever gotten was my first book that I wrote, The Puzzle Palace, which was the very first book on NSA. And the backlash was the U.S. government threatened me twice with prosecution under the Espionage Act, because I had gotten documents from, of all places, the Attorney General of the at the Justice Department, and NSA wanted them back, and I refused to give them back to them. So they threatened me, but there was no basis for the charge, so they just went away, and the book came out. And and the funny thing was, the next book I wrote on NSA, they actually had a book signing for me at NSA. So and I had dinner with the director at his house. So uh, it I write good things about governments and agencies when good things happen, and I write bad things about them when bad things happen. So um, I try to be fairly consistent and not one-sided on anything I write.
Looking back over your career, what are the one or two, let's call them stories, it's much more than that, but let's say stories that stuck with you the most for whatever reason, positive or negative?
Um, there's just I'd have to give it a little thought. I mean, the Manning story, obviously, since I was shot at by a Uzi machine gun. The There's a lot of stories that I've done. Well, actually, there's a lot of in addition to doing writing, I do a lot of sort of research, going places that I don't necessarily write about at the time. For example, I took a container ship, a cargo ship from Oakland, California, halfway around the world to Sri Lanka, stopping in China and Vietnam and all these places. And so I try to get an understanding of the supply chain and all that, and seeing how um, containers get unloaded in China and brought on and all that. So there's a lot of things that I do that I don't write about. Taking the Trans-Siberian. Um, I went to the North Pole last year on an icebreaker. I was in Antarctica the year before. So there's a lot of things that I've done that I don't necessarily write about, but are used for background because of things I'm going to write about in the future or whatever.
Fascinating story. Don't tell me you were on a Russian icebreaker.
Well, I wasn't. I wanted to go on a Russian icebreaker. I wanted to go on the #1 Russian icebreaker, 50 Years of Victory. But because of the embargo, I couldn't, uh, it was impossible to do it. So, but the French had a brand new icebreaker. So I went to the North Pole on the French icebreaker. And then ironically, coming back 2 days after we left the pole, it was still in the ice. We rendezvous. We actually had a rendezvous, about rendezvous with 50 Years of Victory. Um, and we came so close that, and I was standing at the bow of the French ship. You could almost touch the bow of the Russian ship. And it was a very friendly meeting. Everybody on the Russian ship was waving flags and cheering, and everybody on our ship was waving flag, cheering. We didn't have many flags, but um, so it was friendly, and there was a purpose for that. The purpose was that we just came from the pole. They were on their way to the pole, and we were heading south, and they were heading north. So they would follow in our wake to the pole, where we'd already broken the ice, so it's not 9 feet thick. And then we would follow in their wake south. So you come together like that, and then you split up, and then you go that way, and you take advantage of each other's uh, uh, broken ice in the wake. So it was fascinating, yeah, and it was just a amazing experience. I'm actually doing writing on this whole topic uh, for a future book, but so it was fascinating doing that.
As fascinating as talking to you, Jim. On that note, really, it was my pleasure. Thank you again for your time.
Well, great, Thomas. You do such a great job of asking questions. It's a pleasure to have a dialogue with you. So thanks again.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. It really makes a difference. And as said before, if you want to keep up with my work, make sure you subscribe on Substack. In my Substack newsletters, I dig even deeper. I break down tricky ideas, show you practical analytical techniques, and explain how you can use them in your own life. It's free, the link's right below, and I would love for you to join the conversation. Let me know how it's changing the way you look at the world and its people. As always, thanks for your support and see you next time.